She learned very early that silence could be a shield. Not the kind that stopped the pain, but the kind that kept it from spilling onto the floor where others could step on it and pretend they hadn't noticed. Amara Johnson stood every morning at the same bus stop on Maple Street, the one with the cracked bench and the rusted sign that still claimed the bus would arrive at 7:12 a.m., even though it never did. The city had long forgotten to update it, much like it forgot people like her. She wore the same navy blue coat she'd bought 3 winters ago from a thrift store on the south side of town. It was a size too big, the sleeves always slipping past her wrists, but it was warm. And warmth mattered more than appearance when you were already invisible. The bus stop was shared with office workers, students, nurses, and once in a while someone who looked at her twice before looking away too quickly. The kind of look that wasn't curiosity but calculation, as if her presence required justification. She never gave them one. At 29, Amara had learned how to fold herself into quiet spaces. She had learned how to walk into rooms without announcing herself, how to speak only when spoken to, how to offer competence without expecting acknowledgement. Her mother used to say, "Your work will speak for you." Her grandmother used to say, "But this world doesn't always listen." Both had been right. Amara worked as a data analyst at a mid-sized logistics company downtown. On paper, it was a respectable job. On LinkedIn, it looked impressive. In reality, it was a place where she was the only Black woman in her department, where her emails were often overlooked until someone else repeated the same idea, where her name was mispronounced in meetings even after 3 years. Amra? A colleague would say, glancing at her badge. "It's Amara," she would reply softly. They would nod, embarrassed for half a second, then forget again. She never corrected them twice. Every morning she arrived 15 minutes early. She liked the office before it filled with noise and judgment, the hum of computers starting up, the smell of burnt coffee, the brief illusion that this place belonged to effort rather than hierarchy. She sat at her desk near the window, the one no one else wanted because of the glare. She didn't mind. Sunlight reminded her that something outside this building was still real. On her first day, her manager, Todd, had smiled too widely. "We're really excited about diversity here," he'd said, gesturing vaguely toward the office as if diversity were a decorative plant. She smiled back, professional and calm. "I'm excited to contribute." He nodded. "Absolutely. And don't worry, we're all like a family here." She learned within weeks that family meant knowing when not to speak. In meetings, Amara took notes, detailed ones. When a problem arose, she already had 3 solutions outlined. She waited for the right moment to speak, but that moment rarely came. When she did speak, the room often went quiet in a way that wasn't respectful but uncertain. Someone would clear their throat. "Well," Todd would say, "let's hear from Jason." Jason would repeat her idea, almost word for word. Everyone would nod. "Great thinking," Todd would say. Amara would lower her eyes back to her notebook. She never rolled them, never sighed, never interrupted. At lunch, she ate alone most days, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to hear the conversations behind her. "Did you see her presentation last week? I mean, it was fine. She's very calm." The word calm was always loaded. Outside the office, the world wasn't much different. At the grocery store, security guards followed her down aisles with the casual precision of people who believed they were being subtle. At coffee shops, her order was taken last, even when she'd been standing there first. Once, at a clothing store, a cashier asked her if she could afford the jacket she was holding. Amara had smiled. "I'll let you know after I try it on." She put it back on the rack and left. She didn't tell anyone these things, not her coworkers, not her friends, not even her mother, who still called every Sunday evening and asked, "How's work, baby?" "It's fine," Amara always said. And in a way, it was. Every sideways glance, every dismissive tone stacked quietly inside her like bricks, not to build a wall, but a foundation. She believed, had to believe, that one day it would matter, that silence, when chosen, could be strength. Then came the project. It arrived quietly, like everything else important in Amara's life. The company had landed a massive contract with a national retailer, millions of dollars on the line, tight deadlines, no room for mistakes. Todd gathered everyone into the conference room, his voice buzzing with excitement. "This is huge for us. We need our best people on this." Amara looked up from her notes. Her name wasn't mentioned. Jason, Mark, Emily. She waited. Todd clapped his hands. "Let's get to work." As people filed out, Todd stopped her. "Amara, can you stay back a second?" Her stomach tightened. "Yes?" He smiled again, that same practiced smile. "We're going to need someone to handle the data validation. You're very thorough." She nodded. "I'd be happy to." "It's mostly back-end stuff, not client-facing." She nodded again. That night, Amara stayed late, long after the lights dimmed and the cleaning crew moved quietly between desks. She combed through datasets, flagged inconsistencies, built models that anticipated problems before they could happen. She sent detailed reports. No response. She refined them further. Still nothing. Days passed. The pressure grew. Mistakes began to surface in meetings, errors she had already flagged. Jason shrugged. "We'll fix it later." Later never came. Amara considered speaking up, really speaking, raising her voice, insisting. She remembered the last time she'd pushed back on a decision, how the room had shifted, how someone had muttered, "She's getting a bit intense." She stayed silent and kept working. The night before the client review, she found it, a flaw so deep it could cost the company everything. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She sent the email. Clear, direct, professional. She waited. No reply. At midnight, she shut down her computer and walked into the cold, unsure wealth, whether she'd just saved the company or watched it walk past her again. The next morning, the office felt different. Not louder, not quieter, heavier. People clustered near the conference room, voices low, movements sharp. Todd paced, phone pressed to his ear, his smile long gone. Amara slipped into her seat, heart steady despite the tension. She opened her laptop and reviewed her notes again, just in case. She didn't need to. At 9:03 a.m., Todd's voice echoed across the office. "Amara, conference room, now." Heads turned. She stood slowly, smoothing her coat, and walked toward the room. Her steps were measured, her expression unreadable. Inside, the air was tight. Todd stood at the head of the table. Jason sat stiffly, jaw clenched. Two executives Amara had never met were present, their suits crisp, their faces strained. Todd cleared his throat. "We, have a situation." One of the executives leaned forward. "You sent an email last night?" Amara nodded. "Yes." "About a critical data flaw?" "Yes." Jason scoffed quietly. "It's probably nothing." The executive turned to him sharply. "It's not nothing." Silence fell. Amara waited. "Can you explain it?" the executive asked. She took a breath. And then she spoke. Not loudly, not defensively, clearly. She walked them through the model, the discrepancies, the cascading failures that would occur if the issue wasn't fixed. She showed them her timestamps, her logs, the ignored emails. No one interrupted her. When she finished, the room was silent again, but this time it was different, respectful. The executive nodded slowly. "Why wasn't this addressed earlier?" Todd swallowed. "We, didn't see the email." Amara said nothing. Jason stared at the table. "We'll delay the client meeting. Fix this immediately." As they stood to leave, one of them paused. "Good work," he said to Amara. Just that, 2 words. They landed heavier than applause. After they left, Todd exhaled shakily. "Amara, we should have looped you in more earlier." She met his eyes. "I was looped in. I just wasn't heard." He nodded, unable to argue. Word spread quickly. By lunchtime, people who had never spoken to her before stopped by her desk. "Hey, great catch on that data thing. You really saved us there." Jason avoided her eyes. Amara thanked them politely, nothing more. That evening, as she waited at the same bus stop on Maple Street, the sky painted in streaks of orange and gray, she felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, not validation, peace. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't defended herself, she had simply been what she always was, capable. And this time, they listened. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never did. Respect, Amara learned, arrived in fragments, small, hesitant acknowledgments that tested the ground before settling in. A nod instead of a glance away, a pause before interrupting her, an email reply that actually addressed her points. She noticed everything, not because she wanted to, but because she'd spent years noticing what wasn't there. The weeks after the incident unfolded carefully. Todd began including her in meetings that once happened without her. Her name appeared on project documents in bold, no longer tucked quietly into footnotes. When she spoke, people leaned forward instead of away. Still, she didn't change. She arrived early, she worked thoroughly, she spoke when necessary and stayed quiet when not. She didn't perform gratitude. She didn't soften herself to make others comfortable with their sudden awareness. At home, her apartment remained simple. Clean lines, neutral colors, plants on the windowsill she watered every morning while the city yawned awake outside. She liked routines. They reminded her that she was in control of at least some things. On Sundays, she still spoke to her mother. "You sound lighter," her mother said once. Amara smiled into the phone. "I feel steady." Her mother paused. "That's better than happy. Happy comes and goes." Work began to change her reputation beyond the office. Her reports were forwarded upward, her insights referenced in boardroom discussions she never entered. A recruiter reached out on LinkedIn, then another. She didn't jump. She had learned patience the hard way. But not everyone was comfortable with the shift. Jason stopped contributing in meetings, his energy dull, his confidence shaken. When he did speak, his ideas were met with polite skepticism. The dynamic had flipped, quietly, irrevocably. One afternoon, he approached her desk. "Hey," he said awkwardly. She looked up. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, good job." She nodded. "Thank you." He lingered, as if waiting for more, an absolution, perhaps, or validation. It didn't come. Outside the office, the world continued to test her. One evening, after staying late to finalize a model, Amara stopped by a convenience store near her apartment. The clerk watched her closely, eyes tracking every movement. She noticed the security mirror angled just enough to reflect her face. At checkout, the clerk asked to see inside her bag. Amara complied calmly, lifting the strap and opening it wide. The clerk flushed. "Just routine." Amara nodded. "Of course." She walked out, the bell above the door chiming softly, her spine straight. At home, she sat in silence for a long moment before turning on the lamp. She let herself feel it then, the weight of always being watched, always being measured. She didn't cry. She breathed. The next morning, she received an email that would change everything. Subject: leadership track opportunity. She read it twice. The company was restructuring. Senior leadership had noticed her work. They wanted to discuss a potential promotion, one that came with visibility, responsibility, and risk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought of every meeting she'd been ignored in, every assumption made about her tone, her presence, her worth. She replied simply, "I'm available to discuss." The meeting was set for Friday. On Friday morning, she wore a tailored gray suit she'd bought years ago and never worn. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. The boardroom was larger than she expected. Glass walls, city views, people who spoke in decisive tones and listened carefully when she answered. They asked about her process, her values, her goals. She answered honestly, "I believe good work speaks, but I also believe systems need to learn how to listen." One of the executives smiled. "That's exactly why we need you." When she left the building that day, the sun was bright, the city loud and alive. She stood for a moment on the steps, letting the noise wash over her. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt seen. The promotion came with a new title, a new office, and a new kind of scrutiny. Now eyes followed her not with suspicion, but expectation. She became a quiet force in the company, firm, fair, unflinching. She mentored without condescension, corrected without humiliation, led without spectacle. And people noticed, not just her success, but her restraint. One afternoon, a junior analyst knocked on her desk. "I just wanted to say, seeing you here makes me feel like I can be here too." Amara smiled gently. "You already belong." Outside of work, her life expanded in subtle ways. She joined a community book club, volunteered on weekends teaching data literacy to young women in underserved neighborhoods. She listened more than she spoke. She learned that silence, when chosen, could still carry purpose. But the world, as always, had its tests. Late one night, she was pulled over driving home. The officer approached slowly, hand near his belt. "License and registration?" She complied, heart steady, movements deliberate. "Do you know why I stopped you?" "No, officer." "Your tail light is out." "I noted. I'll get it fixed." He studied her for a long moment, then handed her documents back. "Drive safe." She exhaled only when she reached home. Moments like that reminded her that progress was uneven, fragile, that her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. Years later, when she stood on a stage addressing a room full of young professionals, someone asked her how she'd handled being underestimated for so long. She paused. "I didn't let their noise define my voice, and I didn't let their silence erase my worth." The room erupted in applause. Amara smiled, not because they were clapping, but because she no longer needed them to. She had never defended herself. She had simply lived her truth long enough for it to become undeniable. Amara thought visibility would quiet the noise. She was wrong. Visibility didn't erase prejudice. It rearranged it. It dressed it in polished language, wrapped it in concern, disguised it as curiosity. After the conference where her speech went viral, shared across LinkedIn, clipped into motivational reels, quoted by people who had never learned her name properly, her calendar began to fill with invitations. Panels, podcasts, think pieces. "Your story is so inspiring," they said. She learned to ask, which part? The discipline, the restraint, or the discomfort that made them feel progressive by association? She accepted selectively. At one event, a well-known executive leaned toward her during a break. "You're so articulate," he said, smiling as if offering a gift. She met his eyes. "Most adults are." The smile faltered. She didn't enjoy moments like that, but she no longer carried them home with her. They stayed where they belonged, with the people who offered them. At the firm, her presence shifted hiring conversations. She pushed for blind resume reviews, transparent promotion criteria, mentorship programs that didn't rely on informal networks built on golf courses and inside jokes. Some resisted. "This feels aggressive," one director said. Amara folded her hands calmly. Equity often does to those used to comfort. The policy passed. Slowly, faces in the office began to change, not dramatically, but meaningfully. New voices, new accents, new perspectives that strengthened the work rather than diluting it. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Amara sat alone in her office, city lights blinking like distant signals. She opened an old notebook she kept in her drawer. Inside were entries from her early 20s, raw, unfiltered thoughts she rarely revisited. I feel invisible today. I wonder if I should speak less. I wonder if I should leave. She closed the notebook gently. She hadn't left. Instead, the world had been forced, slowly, reluctantly, to make room. But life had a way of testing even the strongest foundations. The email arrived without warning. Subject: anonymous complaint. Her heart sank, not from guilt, but from recognition. The complaint accused her of favoritism, of being divisive, of creating an uncomfortable environment for open dialogue. The language was careful, vague, dangerous. She read it twice, then once more. She had seen this before. Ambition reframed as threat, leadership recast as hostility when it came from someone who looked like her. HR scheduled a meeting. She walked in composed, documents neatly organized, timeline prepared. She answered every question with clarity and evidence. At the end, the HR director sighed. "This happens sometimes," she said softly, "when people feel challenged." Amara nodded. "Growth is uncomfortable." The investigation closed quietly, no wrongdoing found. But the damage lingered. Whispers, side glances, invitations rescinded without explanation. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old pressure, the old exhaustion. That night she called her mother. "I'm tired," Amara admitted. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Rest is not quitting." The words settled into her bones. Amara took a week off. She traveled alone to a small coastal town, waking early to walk along the shore, letting the rhythm of waves reset her breathing. She read novels instead of reports, cooked simple meals, let silence be generous rather than heavy. One afternoon, she met an elderly woman who painted seascapes near the pier. "You look like someone who carries many rooms inside her," the woman said. Amara smiled. "I do. Make sure some of them have windows." When she returned to the city, something had shifted. She no longer chased impact through exhaustion. She delegated more, protected her time, mentored fewer people, but more deeply. And slowly the noise softened again. Years passed. The firm expanded internationally. Amara rose to executive leadership, her name now associated with stability, ethics, results. But the moment that stayed with her most wasn't a promotion or an award. It was an email from a former intern. "Because of you, I stayed. Because of you, I spoke. Because of you, I believed I didn't have to disappear to succeed." Amara sat back in her chair, eyes closing briefly. This was the work, not being seen, but making it possible for others to be. The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope, heavier than it needed to be, as if the paper itself understood the weight of what it carried. The White House Forum on Equity, Leadership, and the Future of Work. Amara read the letter twice, then once more, slower this time. Not because she didn't understand it, but because part of her still carried the reflex to doubt good news. The reflex that asked, "Is this real? Is this safe? Is there a cost?" She placed the envelope on her desk and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Years ago, she would have imagined this moment as an ending, a summit, proof that endurance paid off. Instead, it felt like a doorway. The forum gathered leaders from across the country, CEOs, activists, educators, policymakers. The room hummed with practiced confidence and rehearsed empathy. Everyone had talking points. Everyone had data. Amara listened more than she spoke. When her turn came, she didn't tell her story the way they expected. She didn't start with struggle. She didn't dramatize pain. She spoke instead about systems, quiet ones, the kind that never appeared in headlines but shaped lives anyway. Bias doesn't always shout, she said into the microphone. Sometimes it whispers through procedures, traditions, and assumptions we stop questioning. She paused. And when we call resilience the solution, we ignore the fact that no one should have to be resilient just to exist. The room stilled. Afterward, a young policy advisor approached her, eyes bright. "They'll quote that line," he said. "They always do." Amara smiled faintly. "I hope they build with it, too." That night, back in her hotel room, she stood at the window watching Washington glow, monuments lit against the dark like reminders carved in stone. She thought of her grandmother who cleaned offices at night and never saw buildings like these from the inside. She whispered, "We made it farther than they planned." The weeks following the forum brought something new, requests not just for speeches, but for leadership. Boards, councils, advisory roles where decisions were made before press releases were written. She accepted one, then another. Each came with resistance, subtle at first, then clearer. She's too values-driven. She pushes too hard. She makes people uncomfortable. Amara had learned the translation long ago. She doesn't bend. One meeting ended with a senior member saying, "We need unity, not disruption." Amara responded evenly, "Unity without justice is just quiet imbalance." The silence that followed was thick, but different this time, not dismissive, not patronizing, listening. The breaking point came unexpectedly, not at work, at home. Her mother fell ill. Sudden, severe, the kind of illness that rearranged priorities without asking permission. Amara flew home immediately, trading conference rooms for hospital corridors that smelled of antiseptic and fear. She sat beside her mother's bed, holding the same hand that once braided her hair before school. "I'm sorry," her mother whispered one night. "I didn't protect you enough." Amara shook her head, tears blurring the room. "You taught me how to stand. That was everything." Days turned into weeks. Work slowed, emails piled up unanswered. For the first time in decades, Amara allowed herself to be held up instead of holding everything together. Her mother recovered, slowly, unevenly, but enough. When Amara returned to her life, she returned changed. She began turning down roles that demanded presence without purpose. She stepped back from spaces that consumed energy without producing change. And she began something new, a foundation, not flashy, not branded with her face, focused on one thing only: access. Paid internships for students excluded by design, legal support for workers navigating discrimination, leadership training that didn't ask people to erase themselves to succeed. The first cohort launched quietly. The impact did not. Stories began circulating, young professionals thriving, policies shifting, companies changing, not because they were shamed, but because they were shown a better way. One evening, years later, Amara attended a small gathering hosted by the foundation. She watched a room full of people laughing, debating, planning futures that felt suddenly reachable. A woman approached her, nervous, hopeful. "I used to watch you online. I thought you were untouchable." Amara smiled gently. "I'm just practiced at not disappearing." The woman nodded, eyes shining. "You taught me I didn't have to either." Amara stepped outside afterward, breathing in the night air. The city hummed around her, imperfect, relentless, alive. She thought of all the moments she had stood silent, all the time she had been measured, doubted, tested, and she understood something at last. Her story was never about proving worth. It was about refusing erasure. And that refusal had changed more than just her life. It had made space for voices yet to rise, for futures yet to be claimed, for truths that no longer needed permission to be spoken.